This is PowerPoint session number 2. In this session, we're going to be comparing middle school to both elementary and secondary, but also to junior high. We're going to start by looking at the differences among middle school, elementary, and secondary. This matrix shows the comparison among elementary, middle, and secondary. And this is a matrix that you may want to print for your own use. There's quite a bit of information in this. As we go through this, I'm hoping that you'll notice that for the middle school, all of the characteristics that we talk about for middle school have elements of both the elementary and secondary. We already talked a little bit about the word transition, and this is part of that concept as well. For example, if we look at the first row, the teacher role. What is the role of the teacher in these three different settings? At the elementary level, we generally consider a teacher to be more parental than at the other two settings. For example, first grade teachers often will help kids put their coats and boots on before they go outside. You don't see middle school and certainly secondary teachers doing that. If we skip up to the secondary teacher role, we're saying that it's content driven, because secondary teachers are specialists in their content area, and so they often appropriately see their role as driven by whatever content it is that they're teaching. If we look at the middle school teacher, we're using the word advisor. There's some parental parts in that. They're also driven by the content, certainly more so than the elementary teacher, but their role really is seen as an advisor for these middle school kids. They pay attention to the content, but they also pay attention to those individual needs of those students. If we look at the organization, at the elementary building, we have self-contained classrooms, which means, we all remember what elementary school looks like, which means that a teacher has a group of students that he or she is responsible for, and pretty much the day can be planned according to what the teacher thinks is best. There are some restrictions, of course, like lunch and when kids go to PE or music or those kinds of things, but for the most part, the academic learning can be controlled by the teacher. It's very self-contained. Even when students sometimes switch teachers at the elementary level, there's still a lot of self-contained aspects to that elementary classroom. If we skip up to the secondary, it's very much a departmentalized organization. In large secondary schools, for example, there's often hallways or wings that are the math hallway, for example, or the English wing. And the teachers all teach there, and they have their offices there. It's very much driven by the department or the content area. At the middle level, the organization is the team. The team is made up, as we talked about earlier, of an interdisciplinary group of teachers from different content areas. And so different content areas are represented. There is some self-contained flavor to it in that the team can make decisions about the students on their team. If there are 4 teachers on your team, there's probably 100 to 120 students on the team, and together you are considered the team. There may be several teams, obviously, within a middle school building. If we look at the curriculum, there's a couple of different things we want to look at here. At the elementary level, the curriculum is very much skills-oriented. Reading, writing, math, very important as basic skills at the elementary level. If we skip up to secondary, it's more in-depth. We have biology classes, for example, that are very in-depth in that subject area alone, or trig in the math department. At the middle level, we're using the word exploratory because we're not leaving the skills behind. That's still very much a part of what middle school teachers do, but we're starting to give students some opportunities to do some exploring. Some of that exploring is in depth in particular content areas, things that they're interested in. There's a lot more choice, which actually leads to our next row there at the middle level. Still with curriculum, looking at elementary, we say that the curriculum is for all students. Now, we believe that in general for all students, regardless of their age, but what we mean here is that we always expect at the elementary level for all students to meet some minimum level of those basic skills. I know that a lot of elementary teachers believe that all students should know the times tables by a certain grade level, that kind of thing. And we don't leave students out of that. At the secondary level, we're using the term by ability, although that's a little misleading. All we mean by that is that by the time kids get to high school, sometimes their ability will determine what curriculum it is that they're doing. Not all kids are taking physics, for example. Not all kids are taking trig. So ability may determine the curriculum that they take. And at the middle level, we're using the word choice because there's still certain standards, of course, that we have to meet. Illinois Learning Standards, for example, have to be met. But it's arranged at the middle level so that they have some say in how they're doing that. If we look at the schedule, the next row, the schedule, again, is very self-contained for the elementary classroom. Elementary teachers can usually choose to use the whole morning to do a project if they need to, and that is pretty much his or her decision. If we look at the secondary level, we know that high schools are arranged, their schedule is arranged by periods. Bells ring, kids move forward. At the middle level, we talked about the block schedule a little bit already, but we're hoping to see big blocks of time that can be used in a flexible manner so that middle school students can participate in different kinds of curriculum units and that kind of thing. That doesn't mean there won't be some aspect of the schedule that starts to look kind of high school-like. And in fact, as we talk about transition within those middle school years, we would expect the last part of 8th grade, if that's the last grade in the middle school, to start to be arranged more like what their high school experience will be, so that transition is smoother. If we look at the next row, instruction, at the elementary level, it's very teacher-directed in that the teacher is pretty much calling the shots on everything. They are making the decisions. That does not mean, by the way, that students can never have input. It's just that the teacher is the one planning everything. And then within that, if they're doing a nice job, students do have some input. If we look at the secondary level, we're saying it's student-directed only in that there's much more responsibility on the part of the student as far as how much they participate, how well they do. If they're in a physics class, much of their success depends on their own effort. That is not to say the teacher does not have a role in that, but it's a different thing than at the elementary level. And we're using the word diverse at the middle level, for lack of a better term, because there's some of both of that. The teacher is still, the team of teachers are the ones that are really making all of the plans for students, but there's beginning to be that flavor of student direction as well. In the next row, student grouping. For the most part in elementary, students are pretty much grouped chronologically. In most states, kids of a certain age start school, and then that determines how those groups of kids move through school for the rest of their school career. Student grouping at the secondary level is much more often by subject. So for example, in a class of American literature that might have almost all juniors or mostly juniors, it might also have some seniors in it, it might also have some sophomores in it. So the groupings of students are determined much more by subject rather than chronologically how old they are. And at the middle level, we're using the word supportive because there's a lot of grouping and regrouping that goes on in middle school, and it's all in order to support what the child needs. And those needs can be academic needs, but they can also be social needs as well. Next line, building organization. We know at the elementary level, buildings are organized by classrooms. At the secondary level, very much by departments, as mentioned earlier. But at the middle level, the building organization, if we're lucky, is obviously a team kind of organization. Schools that are built to be good middle schools often have pods, sometimes they're called pods, or learning communities, or whatever physical areas of the school that are set aside specifically for particular teams. And that way, even in a very, very large school, you can have a smaller learning community within that school. A quick example of that, several years ago, I visited a large middle school, and when I walked up to the school, I thought there's no way that this school is functioning like a good middle school. The building is too huge. I just couldn't see it. And when I walked in, I was still feeling that way. I walked down one of the large, wide hallways, and I'm still thinking that. But then I noticed that off of these large hallways were smaller hallways, and that led into team areas. And so there were these smaller hallways that went back into these very open areas with classrooms around the periphery of the open area, teacher workroom there, all of the equipment that they needed, and so students could really function as a smaller learning community within this very large school. And the last line, teacher prep. At the elementary level, teachers are very much trained to be child-centered, as they should, and generalists only because they are expected to teach or be able to teach all of the content areas. If we look at the secondary level, secondary teachers are very much academic specialists, and in fact, secondary teachers are not even education majors. They are majors in their content area who also have certificates to teach. And so our math teachers at the high school have been math majors who also got teaching certificates. That's a very different kind of focus. At the middle level, we're calling it a mixed focus. We still want middle level teachers to be child-centered, there's no doubt about that, but we also want them to have some academic expertise. For example, at ISU, all of our middle school majors must have 2 content area endorsements. The state requires them to have 1. We require them to have 2. It makes them more marketable, but it also makes them better team members. So they do have some expertise in 2 content areas. Neither one of the content areas is as much in detail as far as expertise as the high school teacher would be, but more than the elementary teacher would be. So as we look at this chart, hopefully we can see that the middle school teacher, or all those characteristics about middle school, have some flavor of both elementary and secondary, and hopefully those comparisons are clear. Now we're going to look at the differences between middle school and junior high. This is a real misunderstood kind of issue because in the general public, the 2 terms, middle school and junior high, are often used interchangeably. The general public, understandably, does not know that we're really talking about 2 different educational approaches. Let's imagine for a moment that you've been asked to be part of an evaluation team to go to a middle school, and your job is to really determine whether or not it's truly a good middle school or if it's operating more like a junior high. There are certain things, of course, that you would look for that would be indicators that it is a true middle school. The things we've already talked about. For example, are they operating in teams? Are teachers working together to plan curriculum? Is there a flexible schedule? Are teachers trained in middle school? Are there professional development opportunities for teachers to improve their knowledge and skills in middle school and about the young adolescent? Do administrators understand middle school philosophy and support that within the building and in their teachers? Does the physical building suggest that there's smaller learning communities? Although even traditional buildings can make smaller learning communities, buildings that don't have the luxury of being designed as a middle school. For example, a lot of older buildings will have a team hallway, and so they operate like that is a pod or a separate part of the building, but it's really just the hallway, but it's their team hallway. You would look for things like that. Maybe a mission statement that indicates that personnel understand the unique characteristics of the young adolescent and that the educational approach in that building is designed to meet that. There are also some red flags that you might look for that would tell you that this school is operating more like a junior high. And really the bottom line here, the rule, is that anything that looks high school-like or looks like it would belong in a high school or be more appropriate for high school students would be a red flag. Things like elaborate proms and graduation ceremonies, proms where a lot of money is spent on the part of the student and their parents and the school, is not appropriate for middle school. School dances are great, but the big elaborate extravaganzas are not. Organizations such as student council are good in middle schools, but if students are elected to those, that is a red flag. Elections often turn out to be popularity contests, and that's exactly what middle school students do not need. There's plenty of that later. If you wanted to have middle school and had few enough students, you could simply rotate students through those student council positions and let everybody who's interested in it have a chance to do that. The experience is the most important thing here. If you had more students than you could handle, you could set up a different kind of criteria so that you could choose students. So for example, you might ask them to write a paragraph explaining why they think they could be a good contributor to student council, or what new ideas they had, or that kind of thing. At least that is a criteria that is not based on popularity. The whole election process in and of itself is a good one for students to know about. And I talked to a middle school principal several years ago who ran his students through the entire election process in order to elect a new school mascot. So they still got to be a part of that process and understand how that works, but it wasn't about kids and electing kids. The toughest one, as far as a red flag, is interscholastic sports. That's a really hard one for us because in our culture we're very much sports oriented, and it's obvious when at a middle school basketball game the stands are full, but at middle school Scholastic Bowl, just the parents are there. That's indicative of who we are as a society more than anything. However, when we look at the young adolescent, while physical activity and sports are important in an intramural kind of context, the competition that occurs because of interscholastic sports is not healthy for the young adolescent. Most of the time we think about the devastating effects of being cut from a team, and that can be devastating. And we know that kids physically develop at different rates. And so oftentimes students who are 6th or 7th graders do not make the team because their bodies simply aren't there yet to do that, as opposed to any kind of skill that they might have. Although they may not want to think about it in that way or understand that, all they know is that they've been cut. But the opposite is also a concern. I had a great conversation with a high school coach several years ago who had a freshman student, an athlete, whose parents were upset because the student wasn't playing on the high school team. And the parents' view was, and in fact said, but he was the star in middle school, and he had in fact been the star, but kind of the reverse of being cut had happened to this student. He was more of an early mature, so he was bigger, stronger than his peers. He was a wonderful athlete in middle school, but now that he was into high school, his peers had caught up with him. And I have to think that that can be as devastating as being cut initially from the team. Those are self-concept issues that are centered around things that are fun, but are not essential to the child's learning experience. We've pretty much accepted the fact that this is an uphill battle, and it's not one we're going to win in that we're going to eliminate interscholastic sports from middle schools. However, and I should say that I'm much less concerned with interscholastic sports in middle schools if there are other opportunities for kids that are equally valued within the school, that you don't have to be an athlete to be someone special. But those are the kinds of things that you might look for that would be red flags for you, that would let you know that this school is much more of a junior high than a middle school.